guys, Mikoshi. Today I wanted to make a quick video on the build I'm currently playing, which is a Ranger Lightning Arrow build, which was inspired by Moxie's Cast on Chalk build, and I wanted to make a quick guide. So first thing first, what's the build? So we're going to be playing two main skills, which is going to be Lightning Rod, which shoots arrows onto the ground, and we're going to be then using Lightning Arrow, which will shoot Lightning Arrow, and it's going to actually chain with the rods to deal extra lightning damage, which will add on top to each other. We then have an additional Cast on Chalk setup, which will trigger a spell called Ball of Lightning, and that skill will actually hit enemies every 0.2 seconds, so 5 seconds, and the Ball of Lightnings are actually going to trigger the rods on top of it, which is going to cause our enemies to take an absurd amount of damage. So how's the build going to work out? So while we're mapping, it's pretty much going to be a 1 or 2 button build. We're going to be shooting lightning rods on the ground and then lightning arrow against chunks of enemies. If not, and if you have a high enough DPS, you simply go for lightning arrow, and whenever you have difficulty killing monsters, you then shoot the lightning rod. If you get stuck by many enemies, the best way to get a quick clear is going to be Frozen Salvo, which is a lifesaver. It has saved me so many times from death. It's an emergency button. You tap it, pretty much everything is going to die pretty much next to you, and you will then be able to dodge roll without getting gangbanged by a bunch of mobs. Against bosses, it's gonna pretty much be the same thing. We're gonna be dropping the most amount of rods before attacking with Lightning Arrow. We're then gonna use Voltaic Mark, which is gonna be our mark, which kinda is a curse to mark our enemies, and that will increase the chance of the enemy getting shocked. That's gonna increase the amount of times we're gonna be triggering Ball of Lightning. Attacking with Lightning Arrow will then cause a lot of shock because it will trigger the Ball of Lightning, who will then trigger the rods, and then the rods are going to trigger more shock, and then the shock is going to trigger a lot more Ball of Lightning. So it's kind of like it's not really a loop, but it kind of looks like it, because once you have Ball of Lightnings coming out of you, you could then just start shooting lightning rods, because the lightning rods will then be the ones to shock the enemy. It is important to note that lightning rod has a lifespan. It is either 12-second long or 12 possible chains before disappearing. Considering that a Ball of Lightning will trigger 5 times a second and that you are going to be shooting a lot of Ball of Lightnings, your lightning rods are basically not going to be living for more than 1 or 2 seconds. So you're going to have to shoot a lot of lightning rods to be able to do a lot of damage. That's why in a lot of clips, what you're going to see is a huge amount of burst DPS, and then the damage is slowly going to slow down. That is because the rods actually disappear, and then you have to shoot more rods to then after that do another big burst of damage. Now the build is pretty much played the same way that you played during the axe, so it's very simple. You lightning rod and then lightning arrow. However, the only difference is going to be the Cast on Shock setup. So it might scare off people, however it is very simple to understand. Cast on Shock is a buff gem, which means it will require spirit to be activated, just like a herald. You will actually need 60 spirit. At the end of the axe, you will have a total of 100 spirit, which is going to be more than enough to have Cast on Shock. Now, Cast on Shock will actually not trigger every time an enemy is shocked. Every time you shock an enemy, you will give energy to the Cast on Shock gem, and once it reaches 100% energy, as you can see on the icon on the top left of your screen, it will then trigger the socketed gem. You gain different amount of energy depending on the monster type, from which you will receive 2 energy per power. So what is power? A normal monster will give you 1 power, magic monster will give you 2 power, and then a rare monster will give you 5 power. So when you shock a white monster, you will gain 2 energy because it's 2 times 1 power, 4 for magic, and then 10 for rare and uniques. So we can clearly see that it's a lot more optimized for single target DPS, as rare monsters will only need to get shocked 10 times before casting another ball. Now that might sound like a lot, but trust me, when you have 20 rods on the ground that trigger 5 times a second per Ball of Lightning, which you will have a lot more than 1 Ball of Lightning per second, trust me, you will shock absurdly quickly. Now this is how it works after the patch, right? The patch before used to be whenever you shock an enemy, you gain 20 energy, so it is quite a substantial nerf. However, against unique enemies, I'm telling you, you don't really feel the difference. Now the Cast on Shock setup will require a minimum of 106 intelligence, and Ball of Lightning is 95, so you just need a total of 106 intelligence. That is a hefty price to pay, because you're going to have to make small sacrifices here and there to get to 106 intelligence. However, the way you murder rare and unique bosses is 100% in my opinion worth it. Now there's the debate of should I go Cast on Shock or manual. So on low level characters, manual casting will be a lot better. However, once you reach the end game, so you finish all the acts, Cast on Shock will trigger a lot quicker than you can by manually casting. On top of that, as we saw, the lightning rod have a lifespan of 12 chains. If you are not using Cast on Shock and you manually cast Ball of Lightning, you cannot after that put more rods on the ground once they're disappeared. You're going to either have to do one or the other, which means your damage is going to be considerably cut, pretty much in half. The only benefit to really manually casting would be not having to use spirit. However, as we said, at the end of the axe, you have 100 spirit, and you can also get spirit quite easily on gear. I think it's pretty much the best option and a no-brainer to go for the cast on shock. Now, some enemies might have modifiers as cannot be shocked, so you can always have a second ball of lightning, because yes, you can use twice the same skill, one as a cast on shock and one manually. However, I wouldn't be using it while mapping ever, just in case the enemy for whatever reason cannot be shocked. For the gear on the offensive side, the bow is going to be the biggest carry, right? You're a bow skill, bow build, so you want your bow to be the biggest carry, and it's going to be pretty much half of your currency should be sunk into your bow. The most important mods that you want on the bow is going to be increased physical damage. That is the most important one. The higher the better. Lightning rod will convert 100% of physical damage into lightning damage, which is very good. And then after that, you want attack speed. Attack speed is going to be very important, especially for bows that have the additional arrow as an implicit. They inherently have a lot less attack speed compared to other bow, so you really want attack speed to carry. As well, you don't really have attack speed in your tree, which is kind of a bummer, so it is going to be pretty much the second most important mod. After that, you're going to want flat physical damage. Any other type of flat damage is going to be good as well. However, you really want to prioritize physical damage, attack speed, and then flat fizz. For your quiver, you want flat physical, and then after that, any type of other flat. Then you want increases in damage. It can be increases damage of projectile, increase of damage skills, and then you want arrow speed. Arrow speed is going to be very good because it helps for clear, and it will also increase the damage thanks to a node called the feathered fletching node. The feathered fletching node is going to be any increases or decreases to arrow speed is going to also increase or reduce the damage. And then after that, you want anything that increases your damage, right? For the bow and quiver, it's very simple. You're going to put it on you, and if the DPS goes up, that means it's good. And it's as simple as that. For the rest of the gear, for the offensive side, you just want flat damage, right? Physical being the best, lightning being the second best. That could be on your ring, it could be on your glove. However, on those type of gear, it's not going to be the priority. Although for the ranger, the best defense is going to be the most amount of damage, it is very important to have a few defense set up. The most important defense, and it is important that you understand that, is elemental resistance. They are more important than your HP. Having 1000 HP with 0% elemental resistance, you can only take 1000 elemental damage. If you have 750 HP, which is 25% less, however, you have 50% elemental resistance, you can take up to 1500 damage, which is basically 50% more damage than 1000 HP. If you had 1000 HP with 50% elemental resistance, you could basically take twice the amount of damage. With 500 HP, right, which is half what you had in the beginning, with 75% elemental resistance, you can take up to 2000 damage before dying. So at 1000 HP with 0 elemental resistance, you take 1000 damage. At 1000 HP with 75% elemental resistance, you can take 4000 damage, which is 4 times more. And getting 4 times more HP is very hard in this game. Now, if you are in the early part of the end game, there's no real need to cap yourself to the max resistance, right? Don't sacrifice all your DPS to get there. However, you want to have them all around the 40s. Afterwards, HP will start to become very, very important once you reach the 40-50% mark. However, never sacrifice your resistance to try to get more HP, and get to them at 75% as soon as possible. Chaos resistance is important as well. However, it is a lot harder to come by as a resource, so it will be the least important resistance. You want to have elemental resistance, HP, and then maybe chaos. Once you have a good enough resistance, and I'm talking about elemental resistance and enough HP, try to go for evasion. Your evasion is basically the chance of you completely evading incoming hits. If you have a 50% chance to evade hits, that means half the hits will never actually touch you, which means you're basically immune to half the hits. Now, it is important to understand that it's hits and not damage over time, and it is not AoE damage, nor spells. The best way to get evasion is actually just to get it on items. You want dexterity-based items, as they will give you inherent amounts of evasion. That is very good because we're a dexterity-based character, which means we have a lot of dexterity, and good dexterity means better dexterity gear, which means higher dexterity on the gear. And we will not have any issues with attribute requirement. However, it is important to understand, evasion comes after resistance and life. So if you have a very good piece of gear that has very good amounts of resistance, let's say 20 lightning, 20 cold, 20 fire, but it's a intelligence base, well, it's going to be better than one that has 15% fire and then lots of evasion, because you're going to be missing out on cold and lightning resistance. All right, so for the skill gem, our main attack is going to be lightning arrow. We're going to link it with martial tempo. Supported skills have 25% more attack speed, which is basically 25% more damage because you attack 25% quicker. Then going to link it to fork. Fork is whenever the first arrow hits an enemy, it will then split into other projectiles to then strike other enemies. That is going to be very good in terms of clearing. I'm going to show you a small example on the screen. And then I'm going to link it with conduction. Supported skills have 100% more chance to shock, which is basically doubling your shock chance, which is going to be triggering of the cast on shock gem. Our main DPS damage dealer is going to be lightning rod. Lightning rod is a skill that's lightning arrow, sorry. Lightning rod will shoot rods onto the ground, and whenever you have a skill that chains onto it, it will then trigger the rods and deal more damage. We're going to link it with scattershot, which grants you 2 additional projectile. That means 2 additional rods to chain with. It's going to be linked with primal armament, which grants 25% more weapon elemental damage. So not very 25% exactly more damage, but very close to it. And then we're going to link it to heft, which is 30% more maximum physical damage. It is very good because lightning rod actually converts 100% of your physical damage into lightning damage. So it's basically 30% more maximum lightning damage. Escape shot is a skill that I don't really use anymore. However, for example, it is a small area and you're in a little corridor. You can always escape shot, and usually it's going to freeze the enemy. And that's going to be very good for slowing people down because, first of all, they can't go through the frozen enemy. And if there is a gap, it will actually create chill ground for 4 seconds when you freeze the enemy, which is going to slow them down. And then I have linked to deep freeze, which is going to have a 50% freeze duration on enemies. You can always take escape shot completely off or put any other gem that you want. Now, cast on shock, very important. Cast on shock is a gem itself. And then with cast on shock, you have to link a active gem, and the active gem is going to be ball of lightning. Ball of lightning deals pretty much no damage. All we want it is to trigger every 0.2 seconds, and that's going to trigger our lightning rods. Now I'm going to manually cast the ball of lightning to showcase you this, and this is exactly, you see how it triggers the rods a lot more than when you shot it with, for example, lightning arrow. So for the links, I have deceleration, which is going to make that ball of lightning goes 30% slower. And that is very good because that means the ball of lightning is going to stay in the general area of the lightning rods for a longer period of time, which means it will be able to trigger the rods a lot more. Then I have impetuous, that gives skills gain 40% increased energy, which means cast on shock will then gain more energy, which means it will trigger a lot more times a second. For the mark, we're going to use voltaic mark. 50% more chance of shock, which is very good because we will trigger, well, we will gain energy a lot quicker, which will mean we trigger shock a lot more. And then a 30% increased effect of shock on marked enemies. Shock makes that enemies take 20% more damage, so that is very, very good. And then you add to that on top of what we have in our tree, we're basically going to double the effect of shock, which is like a 40% extra damage, which is completely insane. For Herald of Thunder, it's a small little buff, right? So whenever you kill an enemy that is shocked, it's gonna like save up lightning strikes, and the next enemy that you hit with one of your attacks, it's gonna strike that lightning to them, and it does deal pretty much a lot of damage. We're gonna link it to elemental focus, 25% more elemental damage. However, it cannot inflict elemental ailments. We don't really care about inflicting elemental ailments with Herald of Thunder, so that's very good. So pretty much no downside. And then maim on hit. Maim on hit, what it does is maim slows down the enemy by 30% and decreases their accuracy, which means we will have more chance of evading their attack if they're maimed. Ball of lightning in manual cast is a very good idea to have, because I've seen some monsters like won't have the ball of lightning triggered with cast on shock. So I have the impression certain mobs could not get shocked whatsoever. And if that happens, well, we don't have a lot of single target DPS against unique enemies, so you can always just shoot it yourself, and it's going to trigger the rods themselves. There's also another reason I'm going to be using it, which I'm going to explain in 2 seconds. So I'm going to be using Wild Shard, which is a support gem that gives you a chance of shooting more. Just hopefully it gets it. one day, maybe. So this is when you shoot it normally, right? And then one day, this is going to happen, that little circle, and that is a 20% chance of that happening. And if you do that on top of rods, it will like pretty much like destroy all the rods completely and like deal an absurd amount of damage. It just doesn't want to do it right now, but I'll put a small little showcase. Then you have Unleash, which is very good. Unleash, what it does is it stores a skill and it makes it repeat itself. But it reduces the damage. We don't really care about damage because Ball of Lightning doesn't do damage. So all it does is it just doubles the cast, which is going to be very good for us. Now, another good reason why we have Ball of Lightning is actually a nice little synergy with Lightning Warp. So Lightning Warp is a culling strike, is a culling skill, which makes that you call the enemy and you jump to the enemy with that. And you could do that with Ball of Lightning. So there's a lot of places in the game, for example, there's this little bridge, right? But let's say the bridge was very, very far away and you didn't want to walk there. You can always just shoot your Ball of Lightning and then Lightning Warp to it, which is very cool. So that means you don't really have to like, sorry, we're kind of blocked. But yeah, you can just like teleport to areas, which is very nice. And that's a little small synergy that I use sometimes. Very, very rarely. I don't really use it while mapping because the Ball of Lightning is quite slow. Even if you add acceleration, which is 40% more movement speed, you basically have more speed just running straight than casting Ball of Lightning and then casting Lightning Warp. And then finally, Freezing Salvo is going to be our, lifesaver emergency button. I have it linked with Hourglass, which is 10% to cooldown, however, 40% more damage. Now, Freezing Salvo is like a recharge skill. So example, I pop Freezing Salvo, you can see it's 0, and then it goes 1, 2, up to 12. And that actually takes 12 seconds. So for max power, you need 12 seconds. However, you have a 10-second cooldown. The thing is, Freezing Salvo doesn't have a cooldown normally, okay? It's just, it takes 12 seconds to fully recharge. So you have a 10-second cooldown now, but it doesn't add on top of the 12 seconds. Which is very good because that's basically a 40% extra damage for free. And then I have Close Combat, which is 25% more damage, attack damage for enemies that are 1 meter of you, scaling down to no bonus at 3.5. So 1 meter is about here, 3.5 is like half over here, I think. And so because it's an emergency button, you're often going to be like, for example, stuck. You're not going to like salvo very far away. You're going to salvo on top of you, which is basically pretty much 1 or 2 meter max. So basically no downside for an additional 25% more damage, and you're pretty much going to kill everything that is in front of you. So that's for the skill gems. Let's get into the tree. For the tree, very, very simple. Just go for damage. That's basically it. It's damage, attributes, and any other type of damage, right? So you have increases in damage, which is pretty simple. You have all of that. Increased damage, projectile speed, hits, damage, ailments, blah, blah, blah. For the rest, we go for intelligence because we really want 106. Okay, I have 114, so I'm gonna have to respec, but 106 is what you want. Bonus on equipped quiver, which is more damage. Lightning penetration, which is more damage. Maim, what does Maim do? So you can check over here. Maim, enemies are slower, reduced evasion. However, 25% increased attack damage here. Magnitude of shock, right, which increases the effect of shock, which is very good. Feathered fletching, increases and reductions to projectile speed also apply to damage with bows. That is a lot of DPS, by the way. It's a good like 10-15% more damage, which is, I find, a lot better than Coming Calamity. Here we went for more evasion, dexterity, and then more dexterity, which is important because you needed dexterity to have higher level skills, and higher level skills means more damage. Here, more skill speed, which is just more damage. Here, ignite, chance. This is ignite, penetration, sorry, not ignite, shock, chance, and then penetration, and then more shock nodes. Here, attack speed, blind, and then here I took a bit of attributes because I needed enough attributes, but I could probably take some off right now. Now for the jewels, very simple. You want, the best ones are going to be magnitude of shock, right? 19% magnitude of shock, and then any other increase in damage. If you have a bit of currency, you can go for the meta skills gain 9%, or, meta skills gain more energy, which means they trigger a lot more. However, because the Ball of Lightning cast on crit drains so much of your mana, it's not really necessary to have those. Plus, it costs like 1 to like 3 exalts for that, and I think it's a bit overpriced. I was just lucky with that item. For the ascendancy, there's like two ways of going. Most of you guys are only gonna have 2 or 3. 3, if you go 3, it's pretty simple. Gathering Winds, Point Blank, and Endless Munition. However, if you only have 2 points, 2 ascendancy, sorry, you could either go Point Blank and Gathering Winds, or Point Blank and Endless Munition. Gathering Wind gives you Tailwind, and Tailwind increases your evasion, your movement speed, and your attack speed by a very high amount. And I think it is probably better for the average player than Endless Munition. However, if you want to do just pure DPS, like, yes, you go quicker with Gathering Winds, but in terms of burst of damage, you're going to be better with Endless Munition, because you have more projectiles on your lightning rods, your lightning arrow, as well as your ball of lightnings, which means more rods, more lightning arrow, and then more balls of lightning, which triggers more of those rods. I think that's pretty much it on the tree. I'm gonna have a link on the tree in the description down below for the tree, but very simple. Just go for damage. As long as your DPS goes up, that's all you want.